The Measuring Show.
Since 1970, MPB has been enriching the lives of Mississippians.
Everything we do gives us the chance to grow and learn.
With your support, we are always there whenever and wherever you need us. Together through the years, together in the future. Please consider making a donation at mpbfoundation.org. MPB, your stories, our mission. The nation's longest-running traveling celebration of traditional arts, the National Folk Festival, comes to downtown Jackson for the first time, November 7th through the 9th. A fun-filled weekend for the entire family, exploring roots, richness, and variety of American culture. Non-stop music and dance, folk life demonstrations, hands-on children's activities, signature Southern foods, crafts, and more showcasing the best of America, the best of Mississippi, all free. We'll see you in November. More at nationalfolkfestival.com.
And people that are shaping Mississippi's future, joined by St. Germaine in the booth.
I'm here with you, Russ.
Always electric. I was off last week, guys. I've got to shake the cobwebs off a little bit. A ton of stuff happened over the last couple of weeks. We've had riots in Los Angeles and military parades and anti-military parades, and you know, we might be going to war in Iran. Lots of fun stuff happening all over the world. Nothing controversial, nothing to get stirred up about.
Nothing out of the ordinary.
It's just another Wednesday.
That's it.
Just another Wednesday. But we're not going to talk about any of that because we could spend hours dissecting all of that stuff and it not have any real impact on the lives of Mississippians. Instead, we're talking about something that does have impact on the lives of Mississippians, particularly our criminal justice system, and more specifically, within our criminal justice system, the importance of access to counsel, how Mississippi does it, where Mississippi needs to improve, and even a little kerfuffle that occurred during the special session over a pilot program with the State Public Defender's Office. Who better to talk about what the State Public Defender's Office was looking for in that bill and what the State Public Defender's Office does than State Public Defender André de Gruy. We're also joined by Pam Metzger, who's the Executive Director of the Deason Criminal Justice Reform Center at SMU Dedman School of Law. That is quite the title, Pam. Welcome to both of you to the sit-down.
Great to be here, Russ.
So I just got to get this out of the way before we get into the work of work. You're an LSU guy.
I've got my yellow shirt on right now.
What went wrong?
Nothing's gone wrong.
You guys are in the College World Series.
Yes. Undefeated. We got to win 3 more games.
So I was so excited when Ole Miss put LSU out of the SEC tournament. And it was way premature, right?
That was so long ago, I'd even forgotten that happened.
It did in fact happen. But what I was saying when we were off air is that LSU, there's something about you guys that no matter what happens during the regular season, tournament play, you get to Omaha, and it's like you just know how to do Omaha. And that frustrates me.
Join us. Don't hate us.
You know I'm a Tulane undergrad too, right? So
yeah. So I guess we can't bring you.
We can't be friends. Ole Miss Tulane guy. Well, look, you know, I want to get into what happened to the legislative session a little bit, but before we go there, give us a sense of why you do what you do. What got you into the work of being a state public defender?
Well, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Most of my growing up, I just had this idea, spent a lot of time in church and getting lectures from my parents, and I took away this idea, this concept that whatever I did, I needed to help poor people. And that was, I didn't know how to do that. I thought education was probably the best thing, and I still think that's true. I started college thinking I was going to be a school teacher, set the record for teacher burnout. I was not equipped to be a school teacher. So I decided to go to law school with this idea of doing something called poverty law. And first summer, I worked at a group in New Orleans called Project Save, Spouse Abuse Victim Empowerment. I loved it, and when I got back to law school, still was not thinking of criminal defense. I got an opportunity to work at the Capital Defense Resource Center doing death penalty work. Post-conviction, got to work on, we had an execution a few months after I started work there. So once I got into that, and I thought, well, I'm just going to do death penalty work, and you can't do that without looking at the whole criminal justice system. It's, really for me, it was the tip of the iceberg. And if we're going to solve those problems, we can't do it one case at a time, certainly not at post-conviction when the person's already on death row. So I just sort of backed up to doing trial work, and I just love it. It's, I don't do much trial work anymore, but that's how I got from entering law school with no real idea of where I was going to go to where I am today. And I guess some people would say I've come a long way. Others would say you seem to still be lost. I don't know.
Well, we're all sojourners at some level. I mean, I think what people probably don't understand at times, and certainly, for the listening audience who may or may not know this, I practiced law for 10 years, and my family members would always expect that I would know the answer to any legal question. But lawyers are a lot like doctors. You grow into a specialty, and there are things that you know very well and things that you don't. Pam, how did you get into your interest in the area of public defense?
Well, not a lot different than Andre. Different church, so to speak, since I was sitting in those conversations in synagogue. But it's all sort of the same. A real profound sense that I wanted to be doing work that was in service, and a sense that there was no more profound service you could give than to be on the side of the person who was the most despised, who was the most helpless, and whose only real protection was this mighty Constitution that we have. And there seemed to me to be sort of nothing that was both nobler, or I'll be really honest, more fun than helping people in what is truly often the greatest crisis of their life. It's an honor.
No, it's interesting that you would attach the word fun, because I do think when you're passionate about something, even something that is literally deathly serious, there is a degree of excitement or fun knowing that you're making an impact, or feeling like you get up every day and you get a chance to make an impact. I do think for a lot of people, and this is probably the mindset in Mississippi, maybe more than some other places, the attitude towards people who have been convicted of a serious crime, a death penalty offense, is very much so like that person is done, right? We're going to not lock him up and throw away the key. It doesn't matter what happens to that person. What made you have a passion knowing that you would be stepping into a position that most people didn't understand? Like when you were doing death penalty work, Andre, like what brought you to that moment that says like, even these people deserve this protection?
Yeah, I had that general belief, and even the church's teaching was clarified over my lifetime, that I already had that sense that it was wrong. But, the idea, I didn't think about that as a career until I started doing it. And I really thought as a student I was going to, I got that opportunity, and I had a lawyer take me up to death row and sit down and talk to people. And it was, those things that you hear at the grocery store. How do you represent those people? It was this, the experience of actually sitting down and talking to people and laughing with people, and having people that are living in really rough situations and conditions, who are laughing and making jokes about everything's going on around them. And then it was, that wasn't every client. I had a disproportionate number of clients who were suffering from serious mental illness, and sort of just starting to be exposed to that, and the idea that, we owe something even more to this person and how we're treating them. So it was just, you don't get into public defender work. When I go talk to the Magnolia defenders at Ole Miss or talk to groups at MC Law, if you are looking for prestige, if you're looking for people to like you, this is not, the people who like you are so despised. You're not going to get that appreciation that maybe you probably deserve and look for.
Well, and at some level, it's like, hey, this person has been accused of doing something horrible. And there's a natural sort of human emotional response to somebody who has been accused of doing something horrible. But when you got the consequence hanging on the line of a death penalty or life in prison, you deserve an opportunity, one, to explain that what you did or that you didn't do it, right? You deserve an opportunity to stand against the weight of government in that situation because of the gravity of the punishment.
Sure.
So we got to take a break in a second, but give me just a 60-second overview of what unfolded during the special session, and we'll take up the rest of it at the other side of the break.
So in the special session, we had, through the budget process, we had made a request for funding for this pilot project, and so our meetings all throughout the session were focused mainly on appropriators, the people doing the work, all the way through the process, working with the legislative budget office and the governor's office. And I think that when the bills, and of course there's all these other things happening that had nothing to do with our bill came out and it had been amended in the House, and I think legitimately the amendment was a good amendment, and it answered some concerns that people had. The amendment was just to make sure we weren't going to take this pilot funding and displace the local public defenders. And that just became a target of people raising questions and concerns in the Senate, knowing that they couldn't strip that out and send it back because the House had gone home.
Yeah. So, I think for years there's been conversation around how Mississippi's public defender system is not working, right? It's not adequate for the needs of our population. And what I saw in that bill was a very small baby step to say, hey, maybe there's a different way to do this. I want to talk about that a little bit when we come back from break. We're talking with Pam Metzger and André de Gruy about the state public defender system, what's wrong with Mississippi's criminal justice system. You're listening to The Sit Down with Russ Latino, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Every parent wants their child to grow, to explore, and to dream big. At MPB, we're proud to support families and teachers across Mississippi with trusted educational programming and resources that inspire learning and spark imagination. From PBS Kids favorites to digital tools and early learning support, MPB is here for young minds, engaged classrooms, and families who believe in the power of learning at every age. Empowering families, inspiring learners. MPB, your stories, our mission.
At the Mississippi Arts and Entertainment Experience in Meridian, we believe in the power of the arts, storytelling, and education, just like Mississippi Public Broadcasting. MPB connects communities across the state with quality programs that inform, inspire, and engage. Their audience is loyal and appreciative of businesses that support public broadcasting, which makes underwriting on MPB a smart investment. Join us in supporting MPB. Learn more at mpbfoundation.org.
Mississippi is a place of deep roots where every story matters and every voice can be heard. At MPB, we stand with our local communities, bringing you the voices of those who shape our state through local programming that reflects our culture across small towns to big cities, from the Delta to the coast. We tell the stories that define us, from the music that carries our voices to the leaders who inspire change. MPB brings you the heart of Mississippi, celebrating Mississippi one story at a time. MPB, your stories, our mission.
Mississippi Public Broadcasting. I'm your host, Russ Latino. Today, our guests are Mississippi State Public Defender André de Gruy and Pam Metzger, Executive Director of the Deason Criminal Justice Reform Center at SMU's Dedman School of Law. Pam, I just noticed your comment that you taught at Tulane. Once a greenie, always a greenie. So I'm glad to have a little support against André here.
You got it.
So we talked a little bit about before the break about kind of how you guys got involved, why this is a passion for you, and then a little bit about what happened in the special session. I thought there'd be some value in maybe stepping back and really getting into, I mean, one, why do we even as a state or as a government supply public defenders to people who've been accused of crimes? Pam, you want to take it first?
Pam, you want to give us the con law?
Sure.
Sure.
I will
lecture?
give you the quick. I will give you the quick overview. Look, you can start as far back as why the founders believed so deeply that we needed a right to counsel, because they knew what it was to be oppressed by a king who both made the law and essentially served as judge and jury. In England, the most serious crimes. You weren't allowed to have a lawyer there to defend you. If the crown wanted you to be found guilty, there it was. And so our founders understood the importance of being able to stand up to the enormous power of government, to be able to contest allegations made by police and later by prosecutors, and to be able to have a full and fair airing of all of the facts against the background of the law in front of a jury of your peers. In a modern era, we have a right to counsel because we understand that when faced with the thousands of millions of dollars that governments spend on police and prosecutors, the ordinary person does not stand a chance without someone there by their sides. And every one of us knows what it's like. If you're driving along and you see those blues light up behind you, maybe you're going a little bit over the speed limit, you know how scary that is. Now imagine put in a jail cell for not just few minutes, but 24, 48, 72, 96 hours, maybe 10 days. You better hope that you've got someone waiting there to talk to on the day you come to court, and you better hope they're there on day one to set the record straight and remind that judge that you're a person. You got a mama and you got a daddy and you got a family that are waiting for you. That's why we need public defenders.
And then, the Supreme Court has said that the state has an obligation, right? I mean, dating back to Gideon v. Can't say that word. Yeah. Wainwright. There you go. That the state has an obligation to afford someone who cannot afford an attorney counsel. André, different states do that very differently, right?
Yes. So you have statewide, you have the state actually provides it, or in Mississippi, and we're one of very few now that still pass that down to the counties. And I think it's interesting that we changed to the funding for our judges. So criminal court judges, circuit court level, are all funded by the state. The prosecutors, the district attorney's office, and their staff are funded by the state. It's only the public defenders that are funded primarily by the county. So a lot of times people think, well, you're the state public defender. I got a problem in a far-off county. I'm coming to you, and I have to tell them, well, I'll call them up and talk to them, but all I got is charm. I don't have any authority over the county, and I don't provide them any money, so they probably shouldn't be listening to me.
So, like all of our surrounding states have a system where at least 50% of the cost of a public defender is funded at the state level. Is that correct?
That's correct. Most of them, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Alabama, are primarily state funded, overwhelmingly. Louisiana is
You just do things differently.
They're kind of, it is a 50-50 split. They actually, I would say, have a state system, and we don't want to get sidetracked and start talking about potential problems in Louisiana. We'll let.
Sure. So, Pam, from your view, I mean, obviously you are looking at this not as an individual state problem, but you're looking at it probably holistically across the country. How does Mississippi compare in terms of its system versus what other states are doing?
Well, Mississippi's a peculiar place in that regard. On the one hand, everything André said about the funding is exactly right. Yet you have a justice by geography system, right? You live in a poor county, you're likely to get poor public defense, and that's not right. The flip side is in the last, 2-3 years, I think we've seen more really important constitutional progress in Mississippi, maybe than anywhere else in the country. So you have at the moment this mismatch. You do have and sort of what I'm going to call an underfunded, unequally funded, unstably funded public defender systems, right? These are multiple systems in each county. But you have a spectacular continuity of counsel rule that's unlike really any other in the country. You have the strongest provisions legally on the waiver of the right to counsel in terms of the allocution and the words that have to be spoken anywhere in the country. I mean, Mississippi has a lot of great tools, but it's struggling with funding and it's struggling with structure. That would be my assessment.
Yeah, I know the attorney who filed that rule. He's a real knucklehead.
Yeah, I hear you do. I hear you know him.
So, the system in Arkansas, and I don't want to get us too far afield, but I've always looked at the Arkansas system and thought at some level that makes sense to me, is really a system where for every prosecutor or every prosecutor's office, there's effectively a public defender's office. Is that the ideal, or is there such a thing as an ideal when it comes to how to do this right?
I would not say it's the ideal. I think there's a lot of different ways. And the Arkansas system was set up, I don't know, maybe in the 90s, maybe earlier than that. It's been around for a long time. Through the work of the Public Defender Task Force that brought together judges and prosecutors and defense lawyers for years, Arkansas was often looked at because it's right across the river. Very similar state, population-wise, poverty levels, everything looks a lot like Mississippi, and it has that what Judge Chapman, when he was on the task force, called the mirror image. That it seems like if something seems, this is right off the shelf, we can use it, then there might be some problems there. But so I think that Arkansas' system would work here, but I don't think that, just picking up that model, and that was what Mississippi actually passed in 1998, and just politically, I don't think it's doable to just pick that up and put it in here and say, let's do it. So statewide public defense means something. A lot of people have this vision of the Arkansas model when they think of that, and we're trying to look differently in at what states that have done this reform more recently, like Michigan, that and I'm interested in learning more about Illinois that just did something, but you're having more local flexibility than the Arkansas model.
And Pam,
Russ,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think you got to separate out here the question from funding, oversight, and operations. So, there's a question of who pays for it, and then there's a question about how public defense gets delivered. And the best public defender systems in terms of delivery, what's going on day to day in the courts, they respect local norms and local circumstances. You can't run a system in Chicago the way you do in Grenada. It's not going to happen. But funding wise, right, the parity model you're talking about, where you're trying to match in resources, right, that's the ideal.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, I think it's an important distinction between funding and the actual sort of operational model. And Andre, what you said makes sense to me, and I've seen this in the world of public policy outside of this particular conversation, where very frequently people will go, lawmakers in good faith will say, well, what state is doing this the best? And then they want to apply as a cookie cutter whatever they see in that state to us, with no respect for the fact that maybe if we were starting from scratch, that would have been the right system. But we've got all of this sort of built up inertia behind the current system. And so I guess part of my question, maybe to both of you, as we talk about Mississippi's system, is what are the impediments that come from that inertia to reform?
Well, I think the biggest impediment is change itself. You trying to change anything, it's really hard. And so there's a lot of fear that comes out. Are we going to change it, and is it going to be worse? How is this going to affect me personally? That's an interesting thing. This is really the first time I've gone into a district and sat down with the people doing public defense, the prosecutors there, the judges there, the clerks who are so important, and just sort of talk about, this is our vision. How does this fit with what you're talking about, with what you're doing on a daily basis and what you want to do? And so it's been interesting to get sort of how we adapt our general principle of day one representation to fit this 7-county district.
Yeah, and I jokingly alluded to this. I worked with Andre and Cliff Johnson a while back to file the rule change with the Supreme Court with continuity of counsel. When we come back from break, I'd like to understand what we've learned from that, how the pilot program that you guys now have maybe was designed to figure out whether or not that's working. We're talking with André de Gruy and with Pam Metzger, and we will be right back.
The nation's longest running traveling celebration of traditional arts, the National Folk Festival comes to downtown Jackson for the first time, November 7th through the 9th. A fun-filled weekend for the entire family, exploring roots, richness, and variety of American culture. Non-stop music and dance, folk life demonstrations, hands-on children's activities, signature Southern foods, crafts, and more showcasing the best of America, the best of Mississippi, all free. We'll see you in November. More at nationalfolkfestival.com.
When the weather turns severe, when breaking news affects your family, when Mississippi needs answers, MPB is there. We provide real-time emergency alerts, trusted news coverage, and live broadcasts of emergency updates. Available on TV, radio, and online. MPB is on the air and by your side every day of the year. Because when it matters most, Mississippi turns to MPB, Mississippi's trusted source. MPB, your stories, our mission.
Together through the years, together in the future. MPB, your stories, our mission.
Sit Down right here on MPB Think Radio. I'm your host, Russ Latino, talking today with State Public Defender André de Gruy, Pam Metzger from the Deason Center out at SMU Dedman School of Law. Talking a little bit about the public defender system in Mississippi, some of its pros, some of its cons, and some of its uniqueness in comparison to other states. We talked about the challenge of a system that is locally funded, and at some level, the challenge of a system that doesn't necessarily have state standards. And I'm curious, André, you've lived this. What is the consequence of our system from a negative perspective? Where do we see the holes that are hurting people?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that when the person is having trouble in the system, they can't find their public defender. They don't even know if they have a lawyer. That having no centralization, no one person to contact, doesn't have to be one person in Jackson. It can be one person in Grenada or Kosciuszko. If you're in a jail in that district, that you have one person you can contact and get your problem resolved, and one person that you know to check and see if you got a court date. So it is the not having the structure is really for the person who probably already lacks a lot of structure in their life, and that's how they landed in the criminal justice system in the first place, to not know where to go to find that person, or even, shouldn't even have to be looking for them. They should be right there.
Our current system, and this is where the structure comes into play, our current system is reliant essentially on judges saying, you lawyer, get this case, right?
Yes.
And it creates potentially a situation of dual loyalty. If you know that a judge is the one who gets to decide which cases you get, how many cases you get, then at some level, even if it's subconscious, it strikes me that there's the risk that someone would go, I'm supposed to give a zealous defense. But a zealous defense could very well piss off the court, for lack of a better way to put it. And I can't afford to piss off the court because my livelihood at some level is contingent upon the authority of the bench. Is that a risk to our system?
I think it is. I think when you look at like the ABA standards for an indigent defense system, they have 10 principles that every system should have. Number one is independence. So you say, well, the ABA, they can be out there, a little bit far to the left, but the American Legislative Exchange Council that has been accused of being a little bit far out there on the right adopted their own principles in a resolution. And actually, our speaker, Philip Gunn, at the time, was chair of ALEC when they adopted it. And they recognize the same principle that the lawyers have to have independence, but that also gives the judges independence, and we have to respect judicial independence as well. So it's just if everybody does their job in the system, the prosecutors, defense lawyers, the judges, then the system works the way the founding fathers envisioned it and hoped it would work. And you may not like the results all the time, but at the end of the day, you can say there was justice. So everyone has to work independently, I think, to have a good system.
And Pam, I know the Sixth Amendment's under, maybe 2018 they did that big study on Mississippi's public defender system. I think that was one of the issues they identified, but they identified several sort of constitutional challenges that Mississippi was facing because of its funding and the structure of its system, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
yeah, and I'm just curious if maybe you can share like some of the other potential pitfalls in the current system.
Well, I think the biggest one, I think this was what I'm partly here to talk about, is what's referred to in Mississippi as the dead zone. The way the system is set up, at least prior to 2023, when the continuity of counsel rule gets passed, public defender contracts are still set up this way, but the law works differently. So public defender are typically employed at the municipal at the justice court, so that's people who are arrested in the county, and at the circuit level. And sometimes if you've got a county court in your circuit, you'll have a county court public defender. And what that means is that the contracts are tied to particular courts, the payment's tied to a particular court. But a court case doesn't just live in that one court. So if you get arrested and you start out in the lower court, and the lower court says, yep, this is a case that ought to go up to circuit court, it ought to be indicted, it's going to go off to the circuit court, and the circuit court has its own roster of public defenders. And so you had these enormous gaps where somebody's public defender who was assigned to a particular courthouse said, well, my job's done. My contract says I'm over. Now, the continuity of counsel rule that, like I said, somebody we know was largely responsible for here, comes along in 2023 and says, well, no, you're represented until from the beginning all the way to the end of your case, unless a judge lets you withdraw. The problem is that there aren't structural changes now that have caught up, so that the representation challenge in theory, the one that the Sixth Amendment Center identified, has been addressed. The law now says you must be represented, but there are no mechanisms in most places to make sure that that's happening, and simultaneously that you are adequately compensating hardworking lawyers for the work they do. And let me be clear, good public defense depends on compensating good public defenders. You can't ask good lawyers to work for free for forever. It's not fair, it's not right, and ultimately their representation is going to suffer.
No, that makes a ton of sense to me. I mean, at some level, you do, in fact, get what you pay for. And no matter the desire of the lawyer, right? I mean, if you know that you can't give the time necessary to a case because there's no way for you to put food on the table, and your practice has to be a volume practice, then the end result is, no matter what your intentions are or how good of a lawyer you are, your client is going to suffer because of that. And Andre, I know that there are, MacArthur's done some great work on this, where they've done studies that show that, pre-rule change and maybe post-rule change, there were hundreds, close to 1,000 people, I think, sitting in county jails pre-indictment with no access to counsel for over a year, which doesn't really feel like speedy trial. Right? There are some really egregious examples of that, though. And I'm curious if maybe you couldn't share with the audience sort of some insight into how it can affect one person's life.
Well, sure. We saw those, we're going into a pilot project in Choctaw County. One of the really huge problems was Miss Jouse in Choctaw County, where she sat in jail for this long period of time, no lawyer. When the case gets indicted and she gets a lawyer, the lawyer immediately goes to the prosecutor, gets the discovery, looks at the video, and it's not her.
Yeah.
And she's immediately released from jail. But
she sat in jail for how long?
But it was
96 days.
96. So there's so you have those situations where somebody, it's just how long are they sitting in jail? If you've got a lawyer on day one talking to the judge at the initial appearance, and you can get out within 24 hours, you may still have your job. If you don't get that lawyer and you're sitting there and you're waiting 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks turns into longer than that, now you've lost your job, you've lost the place to live, and to get out, even to prepare for your trial, so you hadn't even been found guilty yet, is your life is really gone. I mean, it's and you also see the situations where people finally see a lawyer, and the lawyer's got an offer from the prosecutor to go home. All you got to do is plead guilty. I've done that as a public defender. Said, hey, I got a time served plea.
Yeah. Well, no, and I was going to bring that up because I actually think that's a really perverse incentive in a system where these kinds of delays occur, is that there is a tendency on the part of someone who's been accused in that situation to say, well, let me just start serving my time, right? And that it becomes a tool that forces plea agreements on bad cases.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to say that happens sometimes on day one if you don't have a lawyer. For those folks that get into court real quickly after they've been arrested, but they don't have a lawyer, you'll hear a judge say, and often with really good intentions, look, I don't have a lawyer here. And if you want a lawyer, we can wait for you to get a lawyer here, but I'm going to have to keep you in jail in the meantime. Or you can waive your right to counsel and we can try and resolve this here and now. And I am sure that's well-intentioned. But what ends up happening is people plead guilty to things they shouldn't plead guilty to because promise of probation is better than spending the night in jail. They don't understand the collateral consequences. They don't understand how it's going to affect their employment opportunities, their opportunities for education. It really has lifelong consequences. And then the next time something happens, someone looks at them and says, oh, well, you got a criminal record. Doesn't much matter that they didn't have a lawyer there.
Yeah, and I think about the case with Dwayne Lake, who between the time of arrest and trial had sat in jail for 6 years. It was a serious charge, right? I mean, he was charged with double homicide, but he was acquitted of double homicide after 6 years of waiting for his day in court. The end result of that is not only did he give up 6 years, he lost his wife, he lost his job. In a lot of ways, even once you're exonerated of something like that, you're always looked upon with suspicion. It's always difficult for you to function the way a normal person could function because you've got a scarlet letter, right? Mm-hmm. And it just strikes me that, obviously there's a constitutional requirement here, both for access to counsel and speedy trials, and clearly we're not living up to that. And so very much have appreciated the work, Andre, that you're doing. And Pam, I just got to know you, but appreciate the work that you're doing as well. We got to take a break. But when we come back, what I want to talk about is understanding the problems we've identified. How does the pilot program start to at least expose or make people aware of those problems? And then what are the next steps to make sure that Mississippi is meeting its obligation to folks? You're listening to The Sit Down with Russ Latino. We'll be right back.
At the Mississippi Arts and Entertainment Experience in Meridian, we believe in the power of the arts, storytelling, and education, just like Mississippi Public Broadcasting. MPB connects communities across the state with quality programs that inform, inspire, and engage. Their audience is loyal and appreciative of businesses that support public broadcasting, which makes underwriting on MPB a smart investment. Join us in supporting MPB. Learn more at mpbfoundation.org.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bobby Rush. As a blues man, I love Mississippi Public Broadcasting. If you support Mississippi music and their local programming, donate now, right now, and become a member today, not tomorrow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Doesn't matter how big or small, but we prefer big. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Desiree Frazier, host of the award-winning news program, Mississippi Edition. We bring you conversations about the latest news from across the Magnolia State. Whether it's politics, healthcare, or education, you'll hear in-depth discussions on issues that matter to you. So join us each weekday morning at 8:30 on MPB Think Radio, or download the podcast, listen through the app, and online.
Down. I'm your host, Russ Latino. We're talking today with André de Gruy and Pam Metzger about the state of Mississippi's public defender system. This all was at some level generated by what happened during the special session, the introduction of the pilot program that you've alluded to, André. I'll say this just as a start, and maybe with too sharp of elbows, but it strikes me that Mississippi is taking too small and too slow of steps when it comes to satisfying its obligation, its constitutional obligation to people who have been accused of crimes and who have on the line their lives, their livelihoods, and their families. And we've been talking about this stuff for not years, for decades. We know where the problems are. It's just an unsympathetic constituency.
Yeah, Russ, I started in law school working on indigent defense reform and got involved with the Public Defender Association. And, I raised 5 kids since then. I've got 5 grandchildren. I've, 37 years of working on something that others were working on when I got involved. So it's been slow. It's been incremental. Some of that is intentional. I think, I mentioned the 98 law that was the statewide Public Defender Act was just going to sweep out everything we had and impose this new thing, and politically it was killed within a year. And so we started doing these incremental changes. This probably could have been done in 3 years, but, took me 3 decades. I didn't go to Tulane. I'm a little slow. So, but we're making progress, and I think we really need to, and this funding for the pilot, I think, is a big step forward in this legislature, in these current times, for them to recognize you got a good plan. We're gonna give you a shot at it.
Well, describe a little bit of what the pilot actually is, what it does.
Right. So what Pam and the Deason Center got interested in Mississippi when they changed the rule, and I think I had already been talking about pilot projects because when then Appropriations Chair Johnny Stringer was at the House Appropriations years and years ago, he told me, he said, "Well, Andre, what you need to do is get you one of them pilots, and then these guys will be lined up outside my hall wanting a pilot." So I was pushing pilots anyway, and then when the rule change came. Deason, which is big on data, they have an empirical policy attorney. I want me one of those. So they're looking at all of this, and they're like, we'd like to come to Mississippi and study implementation of this. And we were like, it's not really being implemented.
Sure.
But that there's some changes in different places, but there's nothing that you really can study. And so we started talking, and that's what evolved. They started teaching me about rural defense. I've been my entire life in this rural state. I live in Jackson. I thought, because I went out and tried cases in these small counties, I was a country lawyer. I'm not. I don't know anything about rural America. And we started talking about that, and it just evolved into the idea of day one rural pilot, so that we can, if the big suburban counties and certainly the coast or Jackson or Hinds County, they can take care of this. Not, they still are going to be underfunded and under-resourced, but in these counties, it's so spread out. We need to create a model, show that it works, and then others can see. The 1986 law or 76 law says the counties can do this, but visualizing it was, I think, a problem. So we developed this idea of a pilot. We started talking to the governor's office. I'm appointed by the governor, so I keep referencing the governor. I just like to let him know what I'm going to do. And so they really helped us tweak this. I want to go, you made, are we going to expose anything? I don't think we're going to expose anything in this district. My instinct is go to the worst place Yeah. And fix it.
And see if you can fix it.
That's what I want to do. And with some suggestions from the governor's office and Pam telling me, oh, that's a good idea. I'm like, okay, why don't we come up with some criteria that's neutral, not is this a problem? And that's how we ended up on the 5th. They have to be able to look at data. They are all in the MEC system, all counties. They're definitely rural. Grenada, the metropolis of Grenada, county of 20,000. That's the biggest thing. So it met all of our criteria, and then we started going in and meeting those people, and everybody wants something to work. I think. And
look, I'll say this. I mean, when we filed the continuity of counsel rule, at least my perspective was that it was a forcing mechanism, right? It wasn't going to fix everything, but it might force the legislature to recognize its obligation. Pam, what are you guys hoping to see? And I've got maybe a minute left. What are you guys hoping to see out of the pilot program?
Look, you got a place, like Andre said, everyone there is doing their best. Everyone there wants to do better. And so what we're hoping to see is an opportunity to show that when you regionalize rural services, when you get the cooperation of people in the sheriff's office, in the judicial chambers, with the clerks, that you can provide day one representation, day one right to counsel, like the framers envisioned, like the Mississippi legislature has promised. We can deliver that, and we can deliver that to hardworking people in Mississippi. And Mississippi gets to be the model for how the rest of the nation should be doing it. That's my goal.
I think that's a good goal.
Okay. Can I get about 10 seconds before we... So I got a call on the way here from a mutual friend of ours who told me that I could announce that we have secured a director for this program.
Oh, that's the best news I've
that
ever
is good
had.
news.
Andre, thank you. I feel like someone just proposed to me on the radio.
Well, y'all are doing good work. Keep it up. I know it's hard work, but it's very important. The Sit Down is a production of Mississippi Public Broadcasting Think Radio, funded by generous contributions from listeners like you. Today's show was co-produced by Germaine Flood, with live stream production by Abram Nanny. For my guests André de Gruy and Pam Metzger, I'm Russ Latino. Stay tuned for Southern Remedy right here on MPB Radio at 11 a.m. And join us next week for a new episode of The Sit Down. You can also always catch us on the live stream on YouTube, on your podcast platforms, you name it, we're there, right here on MPB Think Radio. Signing off. Have a great Wednesday.